Hello, Yarrow.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, really good. How you doing, man?
Doing really good.
Oh, good. What would you like to ask the great Suriel Vasquez?
So with the DC stuff yesterday,
Yes.
and we've got a little bit more info on those games. I think they both look good. But I've started noticing this trend in games where we're starting to see more of this pseudo RPG level systems, gear, all that kind of stuff. We're seeing it with the Gotham Knights gameplay that was released.
Yeah.
I suppose that Suicide Squad is going to be the same way, since they said it might be a games as a service type model.
Oh, they said that? Okay, I haven't really dug into that too much.
They said co-op for sure. I don't think I've seen anything that says it's game as a service, but it definitely feels like it is leaning that way.
Oh God, no.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I like those types of games, but I'm interested to see what your guys' thoughts are on that kind of being the prevalence in games going forward with like your Avengers, your Destinies, and stuff like that. So,
it bums me out. Even just Gotham Knights, when I first started watching that gameplay demo, and we'll talk about it more on the MinnMax show this week, I'm sure. But watching that gameplay demo, I was like, God, if this is not some co-op mess, just imagine how much better this is going to sell than Square's Avengers. It doesn't help that all we get to see is the NPDs, and we don't get to see how much a publisher like Square is making for microtransactions and the real reasons that they want to make these games stretched out and living games. But I always just think of what people aren't satisfied with the math of, Insomniac Spider-Man, that game that crushed so many sales records. Just make a good, compelling single-player game with a concrete beginning and ending, and you will make $1 gazillion if it's a good developer and you give them enough time. So this compulsion to stretch these things into co-op experiences and let's add some more RPG mechanics and really stretch this thing out, it's gross, and I just don't understand why people aren't taking a different lesson from the way that Sony's been doing things. Suriel, can you help me with this one?
I wonder if it's just them kind of hedging their bets a lot, because I think that if you release something like, God of War or Spider-Man, you're kind of putting it into the hands of like quality, which is like this ineffable thing of like, if Spider-Man were bad, I think it still would have sold pretty well.
Yeah.
But I think it wouldn't have, lingered, and like the DLC would probably have been a bust. But I think this feels like, okay, if we're putting this much money for having our enormous team of, however many hundreds of people working on this, what is a safer bet? Charging them once for this much money, for this much content, or having the hooks in place to make money. So it feels like if you're talking to a CEO of like, what is the better option for making us more money? It's the one where players end up spending more money. So even if the game ends up being bad, then like the people who are most dedicated will end up spending more money. And I feel like that's where they're headed towards. Is like that is a secure revenue stream that we can get more money from fewer people if this game doesn't land. But it does feel like, this is the kind of games that we're going to get more of, instead of, games naturally going up to $60, $70 and the games kind of being more contained. Not that like, $70 games would have precluded people from making these kinds of games. It just seems like this feels like a venture made from like, we need to make more money versus like, this is the thing that the studio wanted to do.
Right. Yeah, and it's tough when you see stuff even like, Gotham Knights, where it's like, well, they're inching in that direction of they have damage numbers and stuff like that, so it's not exactly a living game, but if it's that open world and they can keep patching stuff in, it's like, well, they're kind of getting closer and closer to that arena anyway.
Yeah. With Gotham Knights specifically, it's also like, this is the 5th game in that series effectively. So at some point, of the Arkham series, not that it's in that same world, but yeah, like it does feel, even from what you saw, they have like the same kind of grappling interface, and it looks like it is in that mold. So at some point it's like, well, what new ideas can we bring to this concept? And I guess maybe like co-op is one of them. And then they're like, well, if we want more people to engage with it for longer, then we just turn it into an RPG, like a light RPG where you have a skill tree and things like that.
But at the same time, man, it's like, maybe I'm too simple-minded, and this is why I shouldn't be a businessman, is just I think of the original Arkham Asylum was so long ago. If you took the Batman-esque approach to the next Arkham game, and Warner Brothers Montreal was just like, hey, we're making an awesome 10-hour superhero experience, Batman experience, whatever they want to frame it around, and kind of tie into that nostalgia for Arkham Asylum, I think that's a totally viable marketing strategy at this point, and people would show up in a big way.
I still think that the Arkham Asylum is my favorite in the series. I think that smaller scope, the more focused nature of it. I like the theme of being in the asylum itself. And but yeah, going back to what Cyril said, I think it feels like a lot of games like this. Like Assassin's Creed, I guess, is the biggest, the one to do this, where they go to reinvent themselves. What is their idea? Would make it more RPG. Yeah, and it seems like more studios are trying to do that when it comes to what's our fresh idea to reboot ourselves, to kind of change up the formula, and it's the RPG thing, which, like I said, I like that formula to a degree if it's done well, but I feel like we're getting so many games that are doing it now that it's not a fresh, it's not a fresh formula. It's like, it's not a new idea for a game. It's not unique to be like, oh, our game's going RPG.
Yeah, I don't know. God, I'm trying to think of other examples. Maybe people in the comments can help us out, but I want that example of a studio that's known for the big RPGs doing the pivot of the new fresh direction is trimming crap down and making a tighter, more cinematic presentation. There's got to be an obvious example. I mean, maybe the Tomb Raider reboot, but not so much. But just that type of mentality of like, we're taking these 1,000 disparate directions and systems and then just boiling it down. People in the chat, Outer Worlds. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking too. But I think that was more of a money thing than.
Yeah, but I think that ironically it paid off. Having a smaller budget probably made them more. I think, yes, you know what? That is exactly what I'm talking about. It is that marketing angle, at least, of this is a game that's smaller. It's a little bit more structured like a Mass Effect 1. And people showed the hell up. I feel like people were so excited for that structure. Hugo also in the chat brings up Paper Mario. Kind of. I mean, it wasn't exactly. It'd be funny if Paper Mario was that big living game and they boiled it down to this. But yeah, it's a tricky question. I just hope that some studio is bold and has that full change in direction for going back to just that story-focused, more linear experience.
Yeah, people I think it is also like, a scope thing of like, you have all these hundreds of people that you've hired to build bigger and bigger games. It's harder to say like, hey, we're going to build a smaller game and also like lay off 60% of the company just to make this smaller game. So it's a smaller bet. Yeah. I think as studios grow in like the number of personnel, then you have to make games that are larger and larger in scope. And one way to easily expand the scope of your game is to introduce all these progression and RPG concepts and things like co-op multiplayer, like
you're right.
Game.
Yeah, you're right. I haven't thought about studio expertise is such a huge component here, right?
I'd be more interested to see studios, like individual studios, start to split off and do multiple things, like we're seeing with like Respawn, Friend Software to a degree. I'd like to see, you don't have to necessarily do the A team and the B team for things, but like this team wants to do something a little bit more linear, more structured, and this team wants to do something more freeform. You'd be able to do something like that. I think that could be viable. I haven't ran a business in that sense, but I think that could be something they could do.
You know what? Hey, there's 3 of us here right now. Let's start that business.
Yeah.
What are we going to call it?
We'll make an Avengers game.
Yeah, we'll call it We'll Make an Avengers Game. That's the name of the studio. We hope it'll be cool.
We're going to kill Superman.
Thank you so much for calling in, Yarrow, and thanks for supporting us on Patreon. This was just a clip from MinnMax, which is our weekly Q&A for supporters on Patreon. Every Monday, we stream for what we call the High Council, and we answer any question they have about the game industry, our past, MinnMax's future, and on the last Sunday of every month, we actually have a call-in version of MinnMax. So check out patreon.com/MinnMax2Ns, and please give it a shot. Thanks so much.